Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from ISG and DataOps.live. We're excited to cover today the recent 2024 ISG DataOps Buyers Guides, which came out just recently and are, to this date, the most comprehensive look at the burgeoning DataOps marketplace. Just a note of order before we get started. All of our attendees are muted, but if you have any questions, please click on the chat at the bottom of the screen, and we'll make sure we get to your questions before we wrap up the seminar today. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists and speakers today. I'm thrilled to welcome Guy Adams, the founder and Chief Technology Officer from DataOps.live. And also Matt Aslett, the Director of Research, Analytics, and Data from ISG Software. Matt was the principal analyst who led the DataOps Guide research, and we're thrilled to have him today in person to unpack the guides. My name is Nick Halsey. I'm the CEO of DataOps.live, and I'll be moderating today, mostly trying to get out of the way of Guy and Matt as we dig into these reports. So Guy, without further ado, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So I've been CTO of DataOps.live for the last 5 years since the company's inception, but been working on DataOps even longer than that. So probably total of 7 years from what was a very, very nascent industry that virtually nobody had heard of into where it is today, where we're now getting prestigious analyst reports being written about it. So it's been a long journey and a long 7 years, and we've come a long way. My background prior to that is working in the software development world. So I came to the data world with a lot of experience of DevOps and CI/CD from a software and a cloud perspective. And my mission since then has been to bring those learnings and particularly those benefits and advantages for businesses to the data space.
And we'd be remiss not to point out you're very modest, but you're also not just a software leader in the space, you're a thought leader in the space and co-author of Data Ops for Dummies and Data Products for Dummies, 2 great books for our attendees to check out if they want to educate themselves further. And our other panelist, Matt Aslett, had the pleasure of working with Matt for the best part of 20 years. He's one of the top analysts in the data space. Thrilled to have you here, Matt, and dig into these reports. A little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks for having us on this webinar and have the opportunity to talk about the buyer's guides. Really appreciate that. Yeah, so I've been an analyst in the analytics and data space, as you said there, for almost 20 years, 18 years or so. All of that time, covering data platforms, data management, and obviously the last 7 years or so, tracking the emergence of data ops, and have seen that evolve from something that initially you just heard, a few people, a few enterprises, a few vendors talking about it, and now, becoming an increasingly important part of the market. So, yeah, it's a key part of our research.
And speaking of that, so ISG has a particularly structured and rigorous approach to analyzing different market segments. I know that the organization looks at many. Can you just take a minute and explain, the kind of structure and methodology for what you do when you produce these market guides?
Yeah, so the buyer's guides are a key part of our research, and what we do with that, we really try and put ourselves in the shoes of an enterprise that is looking to purchase software in any particular category area. Obviously, in this case, was data ops. So we put ourselves in their shoes, and we create essentially an RFI evaluation that we send out to software providers, and we ask them to complete, and then we go through a grading process, and we grade that, as you can see here, on 7 different areas split across the product experience, so the capabilities of the product itself, but also things like manageability, reliability, but also the customer experience as well. How the provider helps potential customers evaluate the potential value of the software, look at the potential TCO and ROI. So there is as you say, it's a very rigorous approach that we take. We have a continuously updated coverage document. So every time there's a new product comes out or a new vendor, comes on the scene, we add those to that document, and we're tracking the product suitability for each report and sub-report as we go. But when we kick off a buyer's guide process, we either create or renew a capabilities framework that really looks at what are the key criteria that we see that a provider would have to meet to be included in that category. And then there's other things. Obviously, we can't have all the providers. There's only enough space, for a limited number of providers in the chart that we end up with, as you can see here. So we look at sort of a revenue threshold or an employee threshold, or most of the time, both of those. What is important is to point out is the software must be generally available. We're not looking here at sort of vapor or slideware. It must be available, and it must have been updated in the last 12 months. So yeah, shelfware obviously doesn't get included either.
That's great. And looking at some of those product categories, it seems like you're kind of taking like almost an enterprise buyer's perspective. Like it's got to have manageability, reliability. The vendor's got to be big enough. So this is not just any buyer's perspective, but maybe perhaps a larger enterprise perspective.
No, definitely. I mean, we try not to be biased towards larger providers, but definitely it is true. We take an enterprise perspective, and obviously the view on things like manageability, reliability, adaptability reflect that absolutely.
That's going to be important to our viewers, I suspect. That's great. Now, there's something unusual we found as we were invited to participate in the process here was, as it turns out, you didn't do just one DataOps market guide. You did a whole range of analysis, and I want to show our viewers here. Maybe you could walk through how you guys wound up structuring this analysis.
Yeah, so we talk about the DataOps Buyers Guide, and that's sort of the overall umbrella program, if you like, but also then one of the 5 reports as well, where we're looking at overall DataOps. What we've seen, as I said, sort of watching this market evolve over the last 5 to 7 years, is that there are subcategories within DataOps, and as you can see here, we identified data pipelines, development, testing, deployment, data orchestration, pipeline management, workflow management, pipeline monitoring. Data observability also important to observe and maintain the reliability of those data pipelines. And then also, we'll probably talk about this more, but we added this year data products. So this is actually the second time we've done this DataOps Buyers Guide program. The first time we just had data pipelines, data orchestration, data observability, and then the overall DataOps report. This time we added data products. We're seeing more and more focus on data products as an outcome of those data pipelines and the orchestration of data pipelines. So we thought it was interesting to add that. Clearly, it's an emerging area. I think it was too soon when we did this 2 years ago to add that, but now seemed the right time, that there's a lot of growing interest. So we added that there, and then to be clear, the overall data ops, we then combined, if there's a product that addresses at least 3 of data pipelines, data orchestration, data observability, or data products, that was included. That provider was then included in the overall data ops report as well.
So Guy, how do you see these? How do you think they did? Are these the right 5 categories? And what are your thoughts on the breakdown here?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to break it down. I'm certainly very, very pleased to see the introduction of data products, because it is very rapidly becoming the de facto way that the majority of organizations we work with define, as Matt said, the output. The other 3 sub areas: pipelines, orchestration, observability. That's really more about how you're doing it. Data products are really more about what you're doing, what you're producing, and why, and very much focused on the business side of things. And I think that's a really key element of showing the maturity of the overall DataOps market, that data products are becoming that kind of that de facto way that the technologists can communicate with the rest of the business about, what is it that you want, how will we build it for you, how will we provide it for you. So I think this is definitely a great way to break it down. One of the things that's interesting to me is, and maybe we'll come on to this a bit more later, but I don't know many organizations that have enterprise organizations that have needs in just one of these areas, or I would say, even, two or three of these areas. The vast majority of organizations I speak to have requirements across all four sub areas, and therefore, the totality of DataOps as a whole. So I think, we certainly see the individual ones as important, but really the ones that are most significant to us is where each of those sub capabilities are brought together, and represent the whole, because that's what the enterprise customers that we're talking to are looking for. They want one system that does this end to end in an integrated way, rather than 2, 3, 4, 5 point solutions.
So Matt, does this sort of, where are we in terms of like market maturity? How should customers and people watching today think about this? We say data products is new. Are some of the other areas more mature than others? People always, I might want to know, are they ahead or behind the curve, in terms of adoption?
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I think obviously data pipelines, data orchestration are perhaps the most mature. Data observability, I think we've seen great leaps there in the last couple of years in terms of the functionality that's available. And I suppose one of the key things, one of the reasons why we introduced this buyer's guide a couple of years ago was, I think, the maturity of the understanding of what is DataOps, how does it differentiate it from traditional sort of markets, and I'm sure we'll get into discuss that further. I think, to Guy's point, that's still evolving in relation to data products. There's still, people talk about data products or data as a product. It's still often quite vague what they mean by that, and there's good reasons for that. But what we've seen is that it was now much easier, or much more possible, to define the technologies that enable companies to deliver, develop, classify, consume, and manage. Obviously, you can see the four key components we looked at there, data products. So, data products can vary. The precise definition of what a data product is can vary from company to company, but you still have these key capabilities that allow you to deliver them. So, I think overall, yeah, absolutely, there's the market is matured quite well in terms of at least baseline capabilities and understanding what those are.
Before we dig into some specific, sorry, go ahead, Guy.
I was going to say, I think Matt and I probably had the same experience over the last 7 years. I remember when we first started talking to about customers, it was very much, so what is DataOps? This was a term that they'd never heard of. Maybe the more proactive, made a logical leap and said, okay, well, it's DevOps for data, which it's related to, but is significantly different. And in those early days, a huge amount of what we did was education. First of all, it was educating people. This is what DataOps really means, or at least what it meant at the time. Obviously, that meaning, that terminology, or the terminology has morphed over the years. But secondly, and even more importantly, it was educating people. Why should you care? What are the benefits of this? Why would you want to run your data business this way? And it was amazing the number of organizations that just had no idea, even organizations that had, like, a software development group who have been doing DevOps for 20 years, and a cloud ops group that have been doing it for 10 years. The data ops team, or the data teams, were sufficiently siloed away from that they really didn't either understand the benefits they could be getting, or they understood them conceptually but didn't believe they were possible to be applied to data. And we saw an equal mix of that. It's people either, I have no idea of what benefits could be achieved, or I understand it in theory, but I've never seen it done in practice on data, because data is so different. There are so many different aspects of it. I don't believe it can be done. So those early days were very much around education of what it means and why it's important. Whereas now, I don't remember the last time I actually had to break out my what is DataOps slide, probably not for 2 or 3 years. As Matt said, it's much more, the subtlety and the nuance of, okay, a customer will come and say, we want DataOps. And when you drill down into what they're talking about is maybe pipelines and orchestration, which is great. That's a good start. And now you have to say, okay, have you thought about, and you talk about observability, and how are you going to interface this to the business? You talk about data products, so they'll have some good starting points. But I would still say the majority of organizations I speak to for the first time, they'll be, 50 to 80% of the way on this journey, but there's still a number of the more recent gaps, particularly around data products, that we often end up filling in from an education perspective.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to point out as well, that we were very careful to make sure we addressed, as you can see here, sort of the not just looking at the data pipeline functionality, data orchestration functionality, but things like the agile and collaborative practices, the continuous delivery of analytics insight, measuring improvement. Because I think those are the key things. Those we looked very closely at the DataOps manifesto and the 7 pillars of true DataOps to make sure we were addressing what are the things that conceptually make DataOps different from traditional approaches to data integration, and make sure that the products we're evaluating deliver on those, and it's not just a matter of the provider labeling it as a DataOps offering. So yeah, I think it's a really important part, and I think the understanding of that has grown a lot more in the last few years.
I think one of the other things, just in terms of maturity, I think this is a really good reflection of maturity overall, is that when we first started doing DataOps, nobody was talking about it, and no one else really was claiming to do it. Then all of a sudden it became cool, and we saw a huge slew of people, what I was calling DataOps washing. They were traditional data fabric vendors who we're just slapping DataOps. They're doing what they've been doing for the last 10 years, and it's great stuff, but they've been sprinkling a little bit of automation over the top and calling it DataOps. And that's obviously a sign of maturity. More and more people want to come on board. And then you get the realization, people saying, actually, you know what, claiming to be a DataOps platform, but not really fitting into these things, not really doing, more than one of these things, actually doesn't do them as a company much good either, because an organization comes expecting to get 3 or 4 of these buckets, and they only get one, so there's a little bit of disillusionment. So I think we've now seen people roll that back and saying, actually, an organization that builds a brilliant data observability tool will be claiming to do data observability, not DataOps. And same, a tool that just does data pipelining will be claiming to be a data pipelining tool, not a DataOps tool. So I think that sort of, no one wanted to be it, and then everyone wanted to be it, and now we're back to just true DataOps organizations are the ones labeling that way is a sign of the how far we've come in the last 7 years.
This is a really good point we'd like to dig into before we look at the individual reports, because Matt, there's a lot of ground being covered in these. There's a lot of functionality, technical capability, a lot of breadth, and as Guy said, some are specialists and some are, I believe, generalists is the term. Could you talk about like the categories of vendors, how many you had to look at and include in the report to be able to cover everything?
Sure. So there were 49 providers assessed in the overall program, if you like. And as I said, we, because of the inclusion criteria, I suppose that the number that we actually looked at a higher level was probably, I don't know, 60 to 70, something like that. There are a lot of providers in this space, I have to say. And so, but within the individual categories, so there were 28 in data pipelines, 27 in data orchestration. What's interesting is there were only 3 in each of those that were only in that category. So I think we definitely see a lot of providers offering both data pipeline, development and management, and data orchestration. Rather, and there was there's a couple of specialists in each of those areas. There's a lot more specialists, frankly, in data observability. I think there was about 17, I think I might be saying, providers in that category. Generally, there's actually, there's actually many more providers in data observability, but a lot of them are very small. So we include within our reports, we call them providers of promise. Basically, these are the providers that they didn't quite make the cut, but they may be worth looking at. And there was a huge number of those in data observability because there are so many providers in that space. And it's reflected as well. There were 10 that were only in data observability. So there are more specialist vendors in data observability. And then there were 19 in data products that we evaluated, of which 8 were only in data products. For some of those, it's because they're data product sort of development and delivery specialists. There's a few of those. For others, actually, it's because there is an overlap here into sort of the data catalog space. And there's some data catalog providers that don't claim to do data orchestration or data pipelines or data ops, but do enable data products. So there is an overlap there, and that's reflected in our wider research, and we have a separate sort of data intelligence buyers guide looking in that space. So yeah, there's a lot of players, and I think it is an element here of sort of buyer beware. As I would agree with Guy that the use of data ops has become much more specific by providers recently. You don't see many data observability specialists claiming to do data ops, for example. But yeah, definitely it's worth looking at the range of capabilities that are on offer. So it's interesting. We saw overall there were 25 of the 49 providers that were only in one report. So there were roughly half were specialist providers. There was only one actually that was only in 2 reports. So we see that more often providers are trying to or in the process of addressing the full breadth of capabilities. But there were 12 in 3, 10 in 4, and only 3 actually that were in all 5 reports. Which shows that they're addressing the full breadth of capability and offer. And obviously would be remiss if I didn't mention that obviously DataOps.live was one of those. So speaks to I know the journey that you've been on to build out the capabilities to address all of those categories.
Yeah, we were absolutely thrilled to be in that elite group of the 3 providers in all 5. Very proud of that. Why don't we dig into each of the 5 categories and explore them in a little more depth? Let me pull up the first one. This is the overall data ops category, I believe.
Yeah, so this is the overall DataOps category, and as you can see here, we as I said, we do our grading. We end up with a series of obviously data points. We represent those as a performance. So in theory, a company could get 100% if they scored actually top of the range across every single item that we looked at. Of course, nobody has ever got anywhere close to that. But so then there's an overall performance score, which is expressed as a percentage, and then that also is expressed as a grade, which goes from A++ down to well, in theory, an F. And then obviously we then map the results into the value index quadrant that you see here. And so it's important. I talked earlier about we're looking at both the product experience and the customer experience. So you see the product experience going along at the bottom and the customer experience towards the top. So to give you an example here, so DataOps.live was included in the innovative category for overall data ops, which means that the company delivered the highest level of product, amongst the highest level of product experience, certainly above average into product experience, and in this case slightly below average in customer experience. What's important, this is a bit of a quirk of the way we do things, but it's important to understand this. Where we draw those lines that divide that up is based not on 50% or 75%, not on a specific number, but the average of the grades of all the companies that are included in the report. So it does differ from sector to sector, and so you'll see this as we go through here. In this case, DataOps Live was slightly below that average score. Actually, with the same customer experience grade in other sub reports, you were slightly above the average score. But either way, it was a solid customer experience grade. Obviously, one of the things we do see, as I said, when we look at customer experience, we're talking about, sometimes it's not actually, because let's face it, all providers claim to deliver great customer experience, and all providers can point to examples of great customer experience. But what we're looking at there is, really the articulation of what is the customer experience. How is it differentiated? in particular, how does a provider help? As I said, we put ourselves in the shoes of a potential buyer. How is that provider helping us to understand what is the value we can get from investing in their products? How is that going to benefit the company? How can we think about, calculating the TCO, the ROI of that investment, and what tools and methodologies are there to help us do that? By its very nature, organizations that have been, providers that have been around for longer have had more time to focus on those kind of things, whereas, emerging providers have obviously initially focused very much on the product experience, the capabilities, and, rightfully so. So that customer experience, it isn't always the case that the more mature the provider, the higher they score in customer experience. But it is something that obviously tends to benefit them. And one of the things we do say to all emerging providers in any categories, this is really an area where they can differentiate compared to particularly their other emerging rivals, because it is an area that is often overlooked by emerging providers as they begin to get larger. It is definitely worth focusing your attention on that, because anything that helps, as I said, from our perspective, a buyer understand and accelerate the adoption of your product is going to be a good thing.
And I have to say, from my perspective, given the size of our company, to come, not much below, fantastic global organizations like Matillion and Google and AWS, frankly, is we regard as a really big kind of a big green tick, because they've obviously got gigantic budgets and marketing budgets and things like that. So to be so close to them in terms of customer experience, is something that we're very, very proud of.
And I notice on the chart, Matt, that we're in blue and listed as a leader in capability. Can you comment on the colors? What does it mean, leader? In this category here.
Absolutely, fair point. So any company that basically is in the top three, either overall or within the product experience, within customer experience, or within each of the 7 categories, we label as a leader in that category. So as you say here, in overall DataOps.live was a leader in the capability category.
And that means the functional
capability,
what the product actually does, right?
The core product, the core aspect of the product functionality, absolutely,
that's fantastic. Why don't we move on and take a look at the data pipelines report?
So again, obviously, as you can see here, once again, DataOps.live, a leader in capability for data pipelines. Again, just actually slightly closer. I seem to remember it was literally like 0.1% of below the average here. We're very, very close. But again, obviously a very solid score in terms of the product experience, decent score in terms of the customer experience, and again in that innovative category.
That's fantastic. And Guy, when you think about the capabilities of DataOps.live, the platform, where do data pipelines sort of fit into our view of the product priorities?
I mean, they're foundational. The very, very, very first 0.1 alpha version of a product we shipped, nearly 7 years ago, was doing data pipelining. So this has been our bread and butter for year and to be honest, in terms of priorities, it's still very high. However, in terms of our development investment, it's really dropped down the stack a bit, because at the end of the day, there's only so much you need to do. And as far as data pipelining capabilities, we do everything that any of our customers have ever asked us to do and more. So, really for us, this is more like table stakes. You've got to have all this stuff. Once you've got it, that's fantastic. Now you can move to the more, I would say, the more interesting stuff, which is where we start moving, into the areas like data products. Once you've got all these foundational pieces like data pipelines, like observability and things like that, the orchestration, those become the the necessary engineering building blocks to then build the stuff that's really valuable for the business. And that's where like the that overlap with data products comes in, and that's why we're investing a significant more amount of our time in that data products area now, because we're obviously there's always innovation, there's always keeping up with new technologies and new trends, but that's much more flattening off now, to allow a ramp up of investment in, certainly in the data product side of things, but also as maybe we'll talk a little bit more about later, the AI side of things, which is, garnering huge investment, internally.
Matt, was this the most populated of the categories for the different guides?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, as I say, even though there's probably a larger number of data observability providers, but in terms of the number of providers that are big enough to make the cut, yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Data pipelines, I think, was the most popular. Yeah.
I just reflect on that. I think our experience is a lot of people when they think about doing data ops, they're initially thinking about running data pipelines. Right, and we'll dig in a little bit later on about how prevalent that is and how important to getting people off to a successful start. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, the next category, I'm just being mindful of time, so I'll push this along here, is the data orchestration.
Yeah, so obviously we see, and I would absolutely agree with your point there. Data pipelines are the starting point, and obviously the more data pipelines you have, the more data orchestration becomes important to actually be able to manage and orchestrate all those pipelines. So here, as you can see, is a good example of DataOps.live here. Obviously, the average grade for customer experience was slightly lower in orchestration, perhaps reflecting there's more emerging providers in this space. Or potentially pulling that average down. But anyway, either way, DataOps this time just over the line. And again, so now into the exemplary category. So I should have mentioned earlier, obviously, the place to ideally be is the top right, which is the exemplary, when you've got the highest level of both product experience and customer experience.
And I think data orchestration for us is a particularly critical one, because there's a lot of technologies out there that do legitimately do data orchestration, but the scope of the orchestration they do is restricted to their own stuff. So we orchestrate our own stuff, and we orchestrate our own stuff, and we orchestrate our own stuff. So there's a lot of names on here that say like they provide great orchestration capabilities for their own components. We take quite a different view on that, because we've always been, we want to orchestrate the best of breeds when there's, where there are great, for example, like data cataloging is a great example. We don't want to try and compete in the data cataloging space. There's brilliant providers out there like Calibra and Data.world. We want to orchestrate those, and we want to collect all the information and feed them into those so they can then feed onto the business. So, orchestration for us has always been one of our kind of bigger differentiations, because although we tick the functional boxes, we tick them not just for our own technology, but we tick them for 40, 50 other technologies, really all the big technologies, all the big players in the ecosystem.
And I think that's a really critical point, Guy, because I looked at the 49 vendors that are included across these guides, and we probably orchestrate half of them.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So we don't want to compete with a best of breed observability vendor. We want to orchestrate and partner with them, even though we also do observability. And I think that's really important, because when you think about an end-to-end lifecycle management of a data product and all of the elements of what's included in the stack, everything needs to collaborate. And so I think this is a really key takeaway from today is orchestration means different things. It could be orchestration of a pipeline, or it could be orchestration of an end-to-end data product lifecycle, which is where we focus. Next category is observability. A very different set of players here, right, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, as I said, the category with the most different set of players, most unique set of players, and you can see it's a slightly different spread here as well. So there's a lot bigger range in terms of both the product and their customer experience in this category. So, and as I said earlier, a lot of providers that could be included here in theory, but didn't make the cut in terms of the inclusion criteria. So it's a very competitive space. It's a fast evolving space as well. I think one of the things we've seen is, we could maybe it's a conversation for another webinar, but there's a lot of overlap between data quality and data observability, and we were very careful to look specifically at data observability in this case rather than traditional approaches to data quality. There are some providers here who actually do both, and so they are legitimately separate markets with functionality that can address both of those. Yeah, absolutely. I think a very important part, particularly as if we think about the outcomes being data products, and you think about wanting to identify, well, what is the the validity of the data that's made available in those data products. How do you identify that? One of the ways obviously is through data observability. So it's an important part of the overall life cycle.
Yeah, and I think this is an area that's just going to continue to grow as the use of large scale data in enterprises increases. As the use of data products becomes more ingrained, you now start to say, okay, well, there are just, when you've got a huge monolithic sort of data warehouse, you can sort of say, well, look, by inspection, there's a lot of things that we can take for granted. Whereas when we regard things, that same monolithic large data warehouse may be 200, 300, 400 black box data products, in the same way we might have sort of microservices in the software world. Actually, the observability about how data is flowing between those starts to become much more significant.
And we've seen that many organizations, as they scale data products into production, particularly where governance is required, where there's regulatory compliance, security, that observability is critical to being agile, right? Because if you can see it, you roll out updates rapidly, knowing that you can observe and measure and roll back whenever necessary. And so that actually leads us into this data products emerging category.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, with this, we added data products. This year we see it's an important outcome. Not necessarily of every sort of data pipeline and the orchestration of data pipelines, but increasingly so. We see enterprises adopting this mentality of thinking about their data in terms of data products and domain based ownership of data products. So yeah, it's an important emerging area. In this case, we saw DataOps.live again in the innovative quadrant, and again actually a leader in the capability section. And as I said, we were looking really here about what are there are some measurable key capabilities that enable enterprises to both develop and share and obviously the users to consume data products. So that's really what we were looking at in relation to the key capabilities in this space.
So one of the things that I notice, again, we're a capability leader here, and I think as an innovative, startup, that's our focus. And if we can take a moment and sort of drill into some of the areas where we, overperformed, just love to. You pulled out a few of those charts for us, which if you and Guy could unpack them a little bit, particularly Guy, what do we do that delivers against these criteria? And so the first one is the overall data ops capability category. Matt, can you explain a little bit more what's measured here?
Yeah, so as I said, this is really because it's overall, we're looking here at, development, the pipelines, orchestration, observability, and data products, as well as I mentioned earlier, they're all important, those agile and collaborative practices, and I talked about some of those. So across all of those, we were looking at we measured or graded 250 different potential sort of functional areas. And when we put all that together, as you can see here, DataOps.live actually came out top in for capability in relation to overall DataOps with 69.8% performance, and obviously graded a leader. And I think it's significant. A whole what was it, just over 6% ahead of the number 2 provider. So I really speaks to, I think, the importance, as we talked about earlier, of the company being in all 5 categories, but also the level. I mean, the level of that you are delivering in terms of the product experience across all 5, rather than you see some others where they're very strong in one and just perhaps weaker in 1 or 2 of the others. But I think increasingly, as Guy said earlier, enterprises are looking for providers that can deliver a high level of capabilities across all those categories.
Yeah, and then this is definitely the one that that I'm most proud of. This is the one that on behalf of all of our teams and the work we've done over the last 5 years, because this is, I mean, it's in the name. This is what we set out to do. We set out to be the market leader in providing DataOps capabilities to enterprises, and that's and that's exactly where we are. But by it's a 10% or whatever. So it's this is a really huge validation of everything we've done, but also reflective of why so many companies are choosing DataOps.live. It's because they look at it and said, it can do this. That's it. It's a one-stop shop. I can get all of this. And the key thing for me is we talked about a little bit maturity earlier. There's lots of companies at different maturity levels. A lot of companies are on the journey where they're like, look, I know I need A and B and C. Maybe they understand on the pipeline observability. They don't, some of the more sophisticated stuff like data products, they don't quite understand that yet. So saying, what they're trying to do is not buy into something that meets all the requirements today. They understand that they're maybe a little bit less mature. They're trying to buy in something that's going to meet all the requirements on day one, but is also solving the problems they're going to hit in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, 18 months' time. As they mature into it, they want a product and a capability that is, a year or 2 or 3 ahead of what they're currently doing, because that's what gets them to those places much faster. They can follow the work that we've done and our kind of our development partner customers have done to blaze the trail. And by kind of jumping on the bandwagon now, they can get accelerations of 2 or 3 years on the DataOps journey, because the capabilities are just there. They're productized, they're documented, they're trained, and they just run. And you can get 3 years acceleration in 3 months.
So Matt, I'd be remiss if I didn't notice and point out here that when I look at where we rank, who we're ranking against, there are some very big organizations here. I see, IBM, Microsoft, Informatica, AWS, SAP. These are enormous technology platforms. I have to believe that you're looking at a lot of different products in their portfolio, right? Rather than necessarily it's all been packaged up neatly into one product with one user interface and one API, right?
Yes, and that is actually quite what we do, try and take that into account in relation to the fact that in some cases, yes, you may be able to get all the functionality, but you're actually working with 4 or 5 different products. And it's we do take that into account in terms of when we go through that grading. There's an element there of reflecting the fact that yes, you get the functionality, but you're dealing with 4 or 5 different products. You have to maintain that to some extent yourselves. Obviously, some are better than others at actually delivering that output in a single interface. But yeah, it is an important consideration.
And I guess that comes down to we're looking at your original 7 assessment criteria. That's one of the reasons I guess usability is so important. Is just being able to do these things isn't enough. If I've got to go over here to do task 1, and over here to do task 2, and over here to do task 3, as opposed to having a single user journey that flows seamlessly, yes, 2 products may physically tick the same boxes, but the way they deliver that can be radically different.
Absolutely.
So I want to push this along because of time, but I think there are 2 more categories we want to quickly take a look at and drill in. So this second one here is capability on overall data pipelines.
Yeah, so just to be quick on this, obviously, again, 75 different function points we're looking at here across, those 4 sections. So again, the agile and collaborative practices were important, but then we're looking at data pipeline development, testing, and deployment. And I think, Guy was definitely right earlier when you talked about this as being, to some extent, sort of table stakes. I think, definitely the products are a lot more mature in this space, but still absolutely critically important to give the starting point. If you can't as an organization manage and develop and test and deploy your data pipelines, there's nothing to orchestrate, and there's nothing to observe, and you've got no data products at the end. So obviously a key critical area. And again, DataOps.live actually came out #1 in terms of the capabilities category here, again with 78.3% overall. And again, obviously, a leader and the #1 provider.
Yeah, I think that as you said, Matt, just reflects kind of the length of time we've been doing this and the maturity of just saying, what, this is just for us a well solved problem that we get. We have. It just works, and every customer picks it up. It does what they need to do. We can take care of even the most advanced use cases. So that allows us to be spending time on the on the stuff on top that delivers the real business value. Whereas obviously, there are still some organizations that got some work to do to catch up with those table stakes.
And then the third, last but not least, which is fantastic, this category of overall data products. And as you were talking about these emerging space, what were you measuring here in particular?
Yeah, so absolutely. So again, the agile and collaborative practices, but then when we're looking at the capabilities to enable a user to develop a data product, to classify a data product with with information that is accessible by potential consumers of that data product, then the capabilities through which that data product is shared and can be consumed by different users across the organization in different domains, and then obviously the overall management of data products, monitoring and observing usage of data products, and understanding how those data and where and when those data products are used. So overall 100 different function points that we were looking at there. And again, so DataOps.live here was third in data products capability category, but again, obviously a leader in this space.
And I predict will be interesting to see when the third version of these reports comes out. I predict this is going to be a space where there's a lot of movement of the players. There'll be a lot of just next report. There'll be a lot of new entrants. There'll be a lot of moving up and down, because I suspect this is a very dynamic area right now.
One of the things that is very noticeable to me, Matt, is there's a lot of vendors like us that are innovating in the space, that bringing it's like our unique focus area is to serve either one of these categories or the whole category. But there's a lot of the big cloud data platform vendors in here as well. Obviously, you see Microsoft. Yeah, you see AWS, you see Databricks, these large vendors. What do you think that their role is? And some are noticeably not in here as well. I would point out too. So what's happening in the cloud vendor space around this sector?
Yeah, I think particularly in relation to data products, it's an area, as Guy said, I absolutely think we'll see a lot of change in this next year. A lot of the capabilities we're still in the early stages of development. I think particularly with some of the cloud providers. Obviously, one of the providers that you don't see on this list, for example, is Snowflake. They do have some capabilities, but as I said earlier, we only include functionality that's generally available at the point we do the assessment. And so they will definitely, I think, that will change next year in terms of Snowflake's inclusion, but also, in terms of, some of the other big cloud, particularly the cloud providers on this list, where the capabilities are still in development in relation to data products. So I think we definitely will see that this category in particular change considerably.
Another thing I would say, in many ways, Snowflake is reflected here. I mean, we've been partnering with Snowflake since the year dot. It was the first and still the only cloud data platform we support. So I would argue for for the majority of purposes, you could put this provider down as DataOps.live slash Snowflake, because these are the capabilities that are available to to every Snowflake customer.
But that actually tees up an interesting discussion. But before we get there, I just wanted to mention,
Yeah.
Matt, maybe you could explain, but I believe all of these guides are freely available for
They
any.
are, yes. I should have probably mentioned this earlier. Yes, we do make them actually freely available. Obviously, there is a form to fill in, but there's no charge. So anybody, you can scan the QR code there, or if you can type quickly enough, perhaps type in the URL. And yeah, feel free to fill in the form and download the guides. We would love you to do that. What we also do is we offer buyer's guide services for both for enterprises, including actually purchasing the complete research, and also we do things like advising on their software providers, evaluation, conducting workshops, and performing assessments. So the reports themselves, we want to get out there, and we want as many people reading them as possible, and hopefully sort of helping to educate the market. And then we can work with companies beyond that in terms of addressing their individual direct needs.
Yeah, we should have said this before, because I want to save people from screenshotting the list so they can figure out who they're going to go take a look at. Shameless plug for ISG. The guides are extremely helpful. Obviously, if you're considering adopting technology in the sector, that's a lot of vendors to look at. Super helpful for most of our users to be able to quickly kind of see, oh, I know what I'm focusing on right now. This is going to help me shape where I do my research and where to focus. So really love the leadership you guys are showing in this space. It's really helpful for our customers. And like any emerging tech category, there's a lot of moving parts. So thank you. But Guy, you brought up an interesting point about what we're doing with Snowflake in our remaining minutes. Maybe we could, because Matt, I think you made the point that your guides only assess what was generally available at the time that you did the research, which was some months ago.
Yeah, we actually conducted this towards they were delivered in December, so we conducted this in September, October, and November of last year. So absolutely, and I know there's a lot of work that, as Guy mentioned there, you guys have been doing with Snowflake that will come to fruition for the next buyer's guide, which we anticipate doing hopefully a little bit earlier, not running into Christmas this year, but yeah, perhaps into August, into November, and perhaps early December this year. So yeah, it'd be interesting to hear more about what you've been working on, and particularly as I start to think about how we're going to shape the buyer's guides for 2025.
Yeah, so happy to talk about this. So as we announced very recently, Snowflake and DataOps.live have entered into an advanced strategic partnership specifically to focus in these areas. And Snowflake has always been a great respecter of the partner ecosystem, and allowing partners to do what they do well. So we have an incredibly symbiotic relationship. Snowflake build the primitives, the basic building blocks that allow you to kind of access the the internals of Snowflake, and then we take those and build them into the end-to-end DataOps product that you see as like one of the only three that gets ticks in all those boxes. So the two use cases, what we wanted to do was rather than trying to boil the ocean, we wanted to try and bring solutions to very specific use cases to market together. And the two that we initially identified with Snowflake were lack of enterprise CI/CD, how hard it is to get up and running with orchestration, and the other one is how to get your DBT projects really enterprise ready. Those are typically slow to deploy. The speed of getting that enterprise ready is really a problem for Snowflake, but also for Snowflake's customers. So as part of this 3-year partnership and the strategic investment, we're making available a number of products and capabilities via the Snowflake Marketplace. So there will be, you'll be able to find them via the Snowflake Marketplace. You'll be able to click on them. They are in private preview right now. I'll mention that at the end. You can go and visit our website if you'd like, if you're interested in a private preview. But by Snowflake Summit, they'll be generally available. So that'll be part of our joint announcement with Snowflake at Summit. Will be any Snowflake customer can go and take advantage of CI/CD and pipeline capabilities within DataOps.live for free. Up to a certain usage level. So that's a really exciting it's a really exciting offering, and it really kind of goes back to that point. The reason that Snowflake isn't on that list is because they've chosen, I think, a much wiser course to partner on these rather than trying to do it themselves. Snowflake know what their strength is. It's building just the best cloud and AI data platform out there. Our job is to build the best DataOps capability to go alongside that, and those the scores that we just talked through kind of reflect that. So if you look at the next slide, Nick, you'll see we've the first two we're talking about here are the dynamic delivery, which is enterprise CI/CD, and dynamic transformation, which is based on DBT. There'll be some more announcements, some more detailed announcements around this and capabilities at Summit. But we're not stopping there. These were just the first two. But after that, we're going to drill into some of the other areas that Snowflake customers find challenging. Native app builder that takes all of the complexity away from building native apps, Snowpark container services, or Streamlit builder, and probably more to come as well. So the idea is that anybody who's struggling with these particular problems can go to the Snowflake Marketplace, can search for DataOps.live, can find the one of these products that is suitable for them, click, and within 60 seconds or 90 seconds can be up and running. Wizards to get you on board. Very simple functionality, very straightforward. It's been very, very highly optimized to get on board quickly and deliver value to people quickly.
Guy, why don't we spend a minute just taking a look at the first two? I know those are going to be what people are initially most interested in. And I would say that Snowflake in particular said, we picked these two because every one of our customers has this issue. Everybody needs to do CI/CD, whether you're dealing with Snowflake data objects or more sophisticated data products, you need to lifecycle manage them, right? And then I think they told us that more than 60% of Snowflake data engineers use DBT, the open source DBT, to build pipelines. But how do you move those into enterprise production? So if we just drill in a little bit more, because this is all coming live in the next few weeks.
So a simple way to understand and differentiate between these two is as a typical kind of persona. So dynamic delivery is very much targeted at what have been traditionally called the DBA or the infrastructure engineer or something like that. It's all about it's all about the underlying platforms and the technologies. It's about provisioning the the databases, the schemas, and the users, and the roles, and the virtual warehouses, and the compute pools, and all of those sort of things. So it's more of that kind of service layer that other things get built on top of, but then also the orchestration with the ELT tools, or the ETL tools, or the data catalogs, or the data quality tools, or whatever. So it's building out all of that framework, including policies and best practices, including enterprise governance. This is one of the reasons it's so important for large organizations, because all of that kind of governance and guardrails are all built in, along with all the validation and testing. So every time you want to make a change to your environment, you can create a branch, you can make your changes, have them validated locally, then you go and deploy them to a test or a sandbox environment, validate them there. So by the time you actually end up taking this change to production, which may only be an hour later, it's been tested and peer reviewed multiple times. Everything's tracked, everything's audited, everything is done as as configuration and code. Everything is declarative. So it's really that kind of foundational layer that typically a DBA or an infrastructure engineer might do. Whereas if we look at the next slide, which is the dynamic transformation, that's then building on top of that and saying, great, we've now got all of this infrastructure and foundational stuff nailed. What we now want to do is build on top of it our data projects, or more increasingly, we would call them data products. But fundamentally, they're still using a DBT structure. So we've built in our version of our transformation engine, which is backwards compatible with DBT, so it supports any existing DBT project, but it's got a whole bunch of additional capabilities built on top, like support for row access policies and dynamic masking and tagging and things like that. So it provides the complete development environment that it provides the complete deployment environment for that. All of the same governance that we talked about for infrastructure also applies here. And these are massively scalable. We've got customers who've got 500 plus data products in production that have all been developed using essentially the same core functionality that has gone into this. Obviously, this is focused down on one specific set of use cases, but the core elements of what they're doing for 500 data products have been percolated down and made available through this dynamic transformation capability.
I think that was a great phrase. You're taking a project and turning it into a product, data product. Really, how do you build a data product factory in your organization, right?
Yeah.
I mean, DBT is a phenomenal engine. I mean, everybody loves it. The adoption numbers are off the chart. It's fantastic, but people don't typically buy an engine. They buy a car, right? Car has lots of things to make it easier and faster and safer, to drive, to maintain, to repair, all of those things. Now your car has software that gets updated as well. So we think of it that way. It's about how do you supercharge the productivity of Snowflake data engineers, data product owners, by just making it so much easier and more automated and free is a critical part of that as well. So as you mentioned, Guy, where products are in private preview right now. They're going to be GA in a few short weeks at Snowflake Summit. If any attendees are interested, you can either just scan this QR code or just visit our website at DataOps.live and sign up for the private preview. And shortly, you'll just be able to go to the Snowflake Marketplace and just consume them for free. So very excited. We are running a little bit over on time. I just want to invite you both and any wrap-up thoughts that you'd like to make, and maybe we can squeeze, and we've got a few questions in the chat. Maybe we could squeeze in one or two questions before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would just like to mention, since we haven't kind of touched it in detail, is the impact of AI, because it is something that everybody's talking about, and it's one of the things that if I look beyond our kind of immediate roadmap, our 3 to 6 month roadmap, but I look at our sort of a more strategic and visionary roadmap, we're expecting this space to become extremely AI driven. We've done a huge amount of work over the last year to what we call shift left, moving from needing a high skill data engineer to a lower skill data engineer, maybe now to a business analyst. But we've got prototypes where you can build a data product from nothing in 60 seconds with pure natural language. This is something that a CFO could do, or a financial analyst could do, or a warehouse manager could do. Build me a data product that does X, Y, Z, and it builds all of the transformation logic, it builds all the testing logic, it builds all the governance, all inherited from a corporate level. So you get all of that good stuff with for free, but all powered by AI. All of the tests are automatically generated by actually examining the data and things. So that focus on AI is coming, and it is going to be critical, because it's a bit of a vicious circle. Organizations themselves want to be much more AI driven, but to do that they need much more and much better data products, but they don't have the teams and the to build those data products manually. So we're kind of in some ways a bottleneck. Until we can get our customers building these data products in minutes, they can get the hundreds of data products they need to then feed their internal need for AI powered insights. Things are running a little bit slow. So I really feel like I can't wait to see the next the guide come out, because I think the AI powered element of it is going to be certainly amongst those top leaders, those capability leaders, is going to be very, very prevalent.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think and we did evaluate providers in relation to AI. In the 2024 guide, because as you say, it clearly is an area. So in data observability, for example, we see a lot of investment has gone on there already in terms of, because obviously the volumes of data that need to be processed, you can't do it efficiently without without AI. I think there are some clear key areas you mentioned there. Obviously, developing, creating data pipelines, also documentation of data pipelines, understanding your environment, building on best practices, huge opportunities for automation. It was one of the areas where we saw there's a lot of providers that, I'd say when we did, let's say, rather than now, but when we did the evaluation, they had sort of general purpose AI assistants. They can give you some advice, really, really good stuff, but not the level of capabilities that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I anticipate we'll have seen a lot more change in that space when we come to do the assessment this year. So, yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I'll give you just as an example. I was chatting to a customer about this today, so I'll give you my prediction as the gold standard. The gold standard is when, as a data product manager, you come into work, you open up your email, and the email says, "Hey, your upstream HR system added 3 more keys to the JSON objects that it's putting in. I've created a branch for you. I've integrated those. I've written the automated tests. Here's the pipeline showing it all running. Here's a preview of the data. Click here to deploy to production." And
Right.
yeah, and at 9:15 that changed in production. When we get to that point, we've now nailed really valuable AI in the in the data products and the data pipeline space,
Absolutely.
and it's coming.
Well, that's a fantastic wrap up. I am afraid we are now out of time. We covered a lot of ground today. I really appreciate it. Matt, Guy, both of you, fantastic. 2 calls to action. Go to the ISG website, download any of the 5 or all 5 of the guides, and visit DataOps.live and sign up for our private preview and soon to be production products, free to try and free to use in production forever. So it's a win-win for any Snowflake user in the market. And with that, let's wrap up. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Thank
Nick.
you.
Take care.
Yeah, really appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.